Are you tired? It's been a long day, and we've finally come to the final session of the day. I hope you'll stay with us. I've been listening to some of the sessions on the side, and I think the majority of the audience, people in the audience, are listening very seriously, because with a session like this in normal times, you'd have the majority of people sleeping in the back, but this is one of the rare forums that I attend where people are listening so intently. But this is the final session. I know you're tired, so if you'd like, perhaps you can take the time now to stretch or stand up and yawn, whatever. But since you're here today, we would like to look back on the sessions today and to share with you what the panelists felt today, their impressions. And of course, this must lead into tomorrow's sessions as well. So our panelists will talk about what's important so that we can lead into tomorrow's themes. And those are the themes that I would like to discuss with the panelists today. And in the end, when you take something back from the one-day event, I hope that you can take back something that would be stimulating to your brain. Now, I am from Boston Consulting. My name is Mitachi, and the most interesting part is about the contagious nature of entrepreneurship. In the first session in the afternoon, Mr. Jeremy Stoppelman, who was the founder of Yelp, said that he first worked at PayPal and he met Elon Musk while he was at PayPal. Elon Musk is now the founder of Tesla Motors, and he says he was only 4 or 5 years older than me, but he'd started up a business already. Now he was ready to move on to a new business. So, if you really try, you can do it, and that's why he established Yelp. And I think that also is true with all of the panelists in the digital. Although we live in the digital world, to meet entrepreneurs face to face, you feel something, and then that becomes contagious and spreads like an epidemic, and something new is born out of that. That's my first impression. Also, Mr. Larry Ellison, he talked about data privacy. In this new era, we'll have people who feel some anxiety, and there's this resistive force that tries to pull you back into the old days. And I'm sure that I'm preaching to the choir when I talk to you about this, but in the world, the global GDP per capita, do you know when it suddenly began to grow? It was in the 1820s. And until then, in today's values, the per capita GDP in any country was between $400 to $600. But this is just after the agricultural revolution, and when you start trading, that's about the level. But after the first industrial revolution in the UK, the power generated by the industrial revolution really began to change society. Then the per capita GDP rose to $1,000, then $5,000, $10,000, and to $50,000. And here we are in the 21st century. Now, after the digital revolution, we are just about the 1820s. That is, per capita GDP in the digital world will probably grow exponentially in ways that we never imagined. But of course, with the Moore's law, you start, the processing cost of information came down, but the storage cost also in the past decade, compared to paper storage, silicon storage, or storage in other formats, is much cheaper now than paper-based, because the cost has come down, and because this is broadband, the transfer costs and transmission costs have come down. So the real world and the digital, I think gone are the days when we have to make the distinction between the physical and the digital worlds. But now people are becoming anxious about it, because back in the Industrial Revolution in the UK, when trams began to run in the streets, these are the trams, the streetcars, and in some cities, a person with a red flag had to walk in front of the tram to warn the pedestrians that there was a dangerous tram coming, and that was actually a city ordinance set in a particular municipality. So without going through these kinds of responses, we have to leverage the digital revolution. During the last 20 decades, according to IMF, apparently $38,000 was the per capita GDP for past 20 years in Japan. It stopped. But during this time, of course, the developed countries as well as developing countries grew their GDP. In Singapore, it's about $59,000. In the US, it's about $56,000. And of course, the Nordics, maybe $60,000 and $100,000 in Norway and $80,000 in Switzerland. The developed countries were able to increase the productivity of their service industries to increase the per capita GDP. However, in Japan, because 3/4 of the total industries is the manufacturing industry, so we were not able to increase the productivity of the manufacturing industry. It's not just the competitiveness decline of the manufacturing industry, it was others too, but this will be changed by the digital revolution. And that was the impression, the messages I got from the various sessions today. And so I'd like to ask the panelists what you felt were very important as you listen to these sessions. And now, the legendary venture capitalist, Mr. Chao, one of the Japanese who made it in Silicon Valley, if you could maybe wrap it up in about 3 or 5 minutes, if you could. Well, my impressions today, if I may share some bits with you, maybe 2 or 3. One is, well, from the perspective of a venture capitalist, I think that it's the first time since the start of the IT industry that the top 3 markets, the US, Japan, China, have simultaneously, due to the mobile revolution, entered a bubble. Simultaneous bubble. For example, during the internet bubble between 1999 and the year 2000, there was a time lapse between the peaks of Japan, the US, and China. The bubble peaked at different timings. This is the first time that the bubble peaks at the same time simultaneously in the 3 countries. And having listened to the discussions today, the logic of bubble is people are all in euphoria. Are people in euphoria, or has everyone recognized the value of the revolution, and the pioneers have this sense of urgency that they must go for a land grab now? When you look at the education panel or the innovation panel, a wearable panel, we've only seen the tip of the iceberg from the viewpoint of the Industrial Revolution. Maybe we're back in the 1820s now when it comes to the digital revolution. I feel that very keenly. And now it's only been 3 years since the launch of the Android, the full launch of the Android, but now they're #1 in the world. And in the United States, for the first time last month, U.S. users connecting to the internet was mainly for PC, through the PC. But for the first time, mobile connectivity to the internet exceeded that of PC in Japan and China, because they were mobile-centric countries already. So that's not news in China and Japan. But now the United States has finally entered the mobile era, or is entering the mobile era. And having listened to various speeches and sessions today, I felt maybe this is not a bubble. Maybe it's a real bona fide revolution. That's my true impression. And against this backdrop, the positioning of Japan, how will it change? How should we consider the positioning of Japan against this backdrop? I felt a lot of potential and possibilities for Japan. And during the Industrial Revolution, well, Japan, once the goal or objective is set, we were able to work toward that to develop wonderful products and wonderful services. Once we know where the goal is, we have that capability. So in that sense, now that the future is becoming much clearer, I think it'll be up to Japan to focus and mobilize all energies toward that goal. So perhaps, if I may allude to baseball, we are still in the second inning. And in that sense, Google, Facebook, there are some very large companies in this segment. But basically speaking, Chinese, Japanese, US companies still have the opportunity, if they make the strategic investments, correct strategic investments, can still make it very big. There's still room for more biggies. So we're still in the early innings of the game. That's my impression. Thank you very much. Well, if I may go back to your baseball analogy, I guess it all depends on what kind of play or performance we demonstrate. That would decide whether this is just a bubble or a real bona fide revolution. So 10 years later, what's the possibility, what's the probability that we look back and think this was a bubble? Or perhaps is there a 70 chance? I think if we look back 10 years later, I think I will probably think that this was not a bubble. I would bet on that. Because in 99 or 2000 during the internet bubble, those companies who exited and grew into good companies, Yahoo or others, or some companies in Japan, these companies have converted to mobile and they have network DNA. So in that sense, from the perspective of venture capitalists like us, I believe that a lot of money will go to waste, but still this will give birth to super excellent companies, and like Rakuten, maybe we will have companies that will expand from one region to the world and in 10 years' time may make the top 1, 2, or 3 in the world. I think the possibility is still there.
Thank you. So even the internet bubble gave birth to many authentic, real, excellent companies, but not everybody will win, so some people will fail with investment. Okay, Kanemaru-san, you have a different position. You're an entrepreneur in IT digital, and also IT comprehensive strategy and regulatory reform. You are involved in the rulemaking and policy as well. So from a more macro perspective, can you please talk about what you heard today? Yes, thank you. So, Mitachi-san, you said that entrepreneurship is like a contagious disease, and I believe it's a very positive disease, if it were one. For example, in my case, I used to work for a company as a company employee, and I encountered a personal computer. And the age of the entrepreneur in the US at the time was like 19 or 20. So even decades ago, really young people in Silicon Valley started their own companies. And if I look at the audience today, many Japanese people in the audience, they may believe that that they have to enter a company that's already been established, and I had that idea as well. But actually, a company can be created from scratch in order to give form to the idea that you have. So that was a major discovery for me. And like the person from Yelp said, I saw some people from my generation, really young people, starting their own companies. That was a surprise. And there was a second surprise. It's relatively easy to start a company when you're still young, but it is very difficult to grow that company. But customers still support these companies that are developed or generated by the youngsters. This was an aspect that I really liked about the US. For example, in Japan, if you start a new company and you provide good service, then customers will start asking questions like, what kind of track record do you have? How much capital do you have? So, of course, you're a startup. You don't have any track record. You only have track record as an individual, not as a company. And in the Japanese society, it seems that track record of enterprises are valued more highly than the track record of the individuals, although the things are changing recently. So many entrepreneurs have come all the way to Japan to talk to us, and we'll listen to their stories, and it seems that there are still many opportunities in the world available to us. So if you have a great idea, if you have a direction, if you have aha moment, then I hope that people in the audience today will be infected by this fever as well. And hopefully we can share this experience as many people as possible, and I'd be very happy. I don't think it's a difficult story at all. If you listen to the experience that was shared today, you will realize that these businesses are relatively simple, responding to simple needs and requirements. But they were quick and agile, and they tried to involve as many people as possible around them. So, for example, somebody like Chao-san will take care of the money and then identify all the weak points and strengths. So you have a lot of supporters around you that could help you to be an entrepreneur. So don't just go back with knowledge. Hopefully people will take actions. Well, putting money to where your mouth is a very difficult, big thing. But you are also involved in terms of the regulations, writing new rules for digital world. Just based on your sense and as much you can share with us, if you look at the Japanese administration, are they taking a positive stance, try to catch up with the situation or not? Well, I'm not really that close to the administration myself, but 70% of my time in a week is now spent on regulatory reform. But the reform is only possible with the support of everyone. And I feel that the administration is willing to make changes, more willing than the regimes in the past. For example, when Mr. Koizumi was the prime minister, he was on his own. But this time around, we have a whole network of people, multiple key persons who want to make this reform come true. For example, Mikitani-san and myself are members of the Competitiveness Council. And there are younger people as well who can basically lead these thoughts into actions. So I believe that the reforms are possible, major breakthroughs are possible, and this is going to be the last opportunity given to us in Japan. If Abe administration, Abe regime is unsuccessful in doing this, what would happen? Well, of course, for individuals can take their own risks, but expectation toward Japan as a country from overseas will be miserable once we turn out to be unsuccessful with a reform. So I truly hope that everyone here will support our initiative. So there's a lot of money, a lot of cash available. And if the players are serious, some of these entrepreneurship will turn into real companies. And in terms of regulation and system, if we can reform, maybe for the first time in Japan, we can invite players from abroad. Is that true? And based on that understanding, I have a question to Hirai-san. Now, Cisco has gone through a lot of metamorphosis. In other words, it has changed its core business from one to the other. Now you're going into the infrastructure. So there is money, regulation. We need infrastructure to help the growth of the entrepreneurs as well. And in Japan and in Korea, actually, we went ahead with the IT because there was a good infrastructure, broadband connection. So could you please talk about your impression of what happened today? Yes, I'm Hirai. I'm one of the directors of the Japan Association of Venue Economy, starting from this February. That's why I'm part of this panel. Cisco has 30-year history. It was born in San Jose, and it has 22-year history in Japan as well. Now, regardless of the size or the type of the startup, well, even within large enterprise, we need to pursue the spirit of entrepreneurship all the time. That's how I feel. And right next to Mikitani-san, I've been listening to all these sessions, trying to translate these different experiences into my own situation and figure out what I could do using this knowledge. Now, Cisco's history equals Internet's history, so to speak. But it's not so much about the technology, but more about use of Internet. First, we started with email, search, and web. We started with the digitalization of the information, and then e-commerce and supply chain. The business process was digitized. And where we are now, we are trying to digitize the interaction between people. I'm talking about social network, mobile, and also cloud computing. And what will come next? Society and industry themselves will be digitized, and the internet can help that transformation. And one important thing for us to consider is creating social values. So corporate social responsibility, or CSR, is a very popular phrase, but instead of thinking about CSR, we need to think about how to utilize internet technology and provide services and products, and how much social value we can create from that whole process. I believe that is a very important criteria for value going forward. So that's CSV. Secondly, where are the business opportunities? Right now, we have the data, and the data is evolved into information, and we utilize information. And the next step is converting information into intelligence. So there is a huge business opportunity right there in that conversion. That's how I felt today. Now, what do we need in order to accelerate this whole process in Japan? Of course, angel tax benefits, and also promotion of women. As was mentioned today, Japanese people need to be more globalized, and we need to live with the English language as well. There are some men who are not very motivated. So we need more motivated both men and women, because people are too quiet usually. But today we had many people positively, aggressively asking questions during a Q&A session today. So we need to build a social platform that will give birth to more aggressive men and women. So information, data converts into information. And once that information is relevant to you, that's information. But how does information convert to intelligence? Well, if you just have information, there's no value. So it has to be converted into intelligence. In other words, it has to be converted into strategy and a new product and new services. So in the case of an enterprise, don't just have information, but maybe do analytics and use big data and win in business, or get a new piece of data about requirements or needs from customers. That's what you mean, yes. So aggressive business persons that you're talking about. I think we need diversity in order to build a new model. And the problem with the Japanese society really is, well, Cisco is global, and you have to, of course, innovate in Japan as well. But if you try to innovate with just Japanese people, it would be very difficult. So what can you do to help this process?
人材を育成していくということが重要だと思います。多分これは三木谷さん、楽天さん考えたらもうかなり今採用。
Mikitani-san, at Rakuten, I think that you are hiring a large number of foreign employees, I think. But to have people with different backgrounds and cultural backgrounds to recognize each other, that's the starting point of globalization. And that would, of course, give birth to unprecedented new values, generate new values. The second is to create an environment that recognizes challenges, people's challenges. That's part of creating a good corporate culture. So not only data privacy, but, for example, relaxing visa requirements and perhaps enhancing by 10 times perhaps the high-skilled people. And people with high skills can get a 10-year visa in Japan and work for 10 years in Japan. If they're entrepreneurs and if they bring money and capital with them to Japan, then of course, in Japan or in Singapore, they have different rules for people who bring money and invest and create their own company in Singapore. So perhaps we need that kind of tax system. So now we have innovation, disruptive innovation, creating a totally new type of world. And I was talking to you earlier, and you said that you're providing smartphone-related services, provide the service from the devices all the way to ecosystems, and you can provide that service for the entire ecosystem for 2,000 yen per month. Could we talk to you about that? Could you talk about that? Yes, I'm Ishida from FreeBit. Well, Jane, or the New Economy Summit was held last year as well. So this is the second time, and are many of you here for the second time? Did many of you attend last year's session? Thank you. Quite a large number of you. Well, this New Economy Summit, well, I've been working from the corporate side, but this is really useful. How useful is it? Well, last year, I think the main theme was entrepreneurship, and during last year's sessions, we were talking about entrepreneurship for those young people who are younger than me, developing world-class services, and that sparked the entrepreneur fire in me, or a ring-type startup where you turn the cycle making small corrections, and also internet natives. You have to change the system for internet natives. And when we discussed this last year, I looked back on myself and decided I have to go back to basics and try to do things that I really wanted to do. That is to use the internet and contribute to society. I was working under Mr. Murai. I've been working in computer sciences or the internet under Mr. Murai, and I wanted to go back to those basics and to expand the internet. The most important thing is PC smartphones, which are connected to the network. But to own a smartphone is rather expensive. 60% of the smartphone users are dissatisfied with the price, and hardly any of the people know about the price package, but carriers make a 2 trillion yen revenue out of this. So this is a necessary evil, in a sense. So I decided to develop a totally new system, the 3 things that I discussed earlier, also what Mr. Larry Ellison said, that is vertical integration. So Apple is a software company. They recognize this, and through software, they decided to pivot and not compete with software firms, but to maximize the value of software with the carriers. And they started with the iPod and brought it all the way up to the iPhone. And so smartphone, because we are a software algorithm company, we have to we want to incorporate all these processes into the smartphone process. And if you can manage everything using the software, it will change the iPhone. For example, the distribution, even the smartphone itself, software was developed in-house, and we were able to achieve 2,000 yen per month. Of course, we have a high level of technology accumulated. And when I discussed this year, through what I learned at the Japan Association of New Economy, I was able to come up with a new product. So this is something that I can preach to all of you. So this is what I learned from the New Economy Summit last year. Learning means to correct your behavior as a result. If you learn something new, then you can correct your behavior, even today, starting today. And as the others said, you can challenge new ventures and new things. That's very important. A venture like ours, able to develop this very thin hardware like this, and this was all developed through vertical integration through us. So we have a store in Fukuoka for test, and this is called a free smartphone. We are regarded as a carrier, so we can create a new social phenomenon like this. Now, somebody talked about the Moore's Law, and Moore's Law works all the time, but in 10 years, the CPU speed has evolved by 200 times. In the past 10 years, when CPU is accelerated by 200 times, I think you can foresee this and look forward and prepare for this. But there are some areas which will be very difficult to adjust. So you have to look at the advancements in computer science and really think seriously about what it means for computer speeds to become 200 times faster and prepare for it in advance. So I do hope that you will leverage what you learned at the summit and challenge new things. Thank you. So to learn and to change your behavior. Thank you for that encouragement. So why did you start in Fukuoka? Why did you start your activity in Fukuoka? Well, venture firms like us, well, in Japan, we see a declining population. So we have to go out of the country in the future. And when you look at the map, you find that Kyushu is at the center of Asia when you draw a concentric circle. So if you go from Tokyo to Shanghai, it takes 3 hours, but from Fukuoka to Shanghai, it's only 1.5 hours. And there are many Asians there. So as for news, to develop a new smartphone service, we thought that Fukuoka would be the most appropriate place to start, and that's why we began there. Could I add something? Well, when we tried this out at a store, O2O is true because you can now see things that you couldn't see in the online world. So to analyze on online and to go offline, we thought it would be possible with a professional like us, but we will see new markets that were not there with the online markets, and I think we can get visibility into really new things. So the O2O world, I think, is very, very interesting in that sense. Way back, the internet company Swap, the first generation company, started the online brokerage, and they grew because they started with us. They located small real life shops all across the country and learned about the customer. It's similar to this. Mr. Takashima is the mayor of Fukushima, and they were chosen as a special district. And when you ride the underground, there's always announcements in Japanese, English, Chinese, and South Korean, 4 languages. So when you go to Kyushu, and you do get the feeling that Kyushu is part of Asia. Now, the representative director of Jane, as well as the chairman of Rakuten, if you could look back, Mikitani-san, on today's events, you listened very intently and you're taking notes all the time, so your shoulders must be stiff. Well, my impression is, this is really, really dangerous in a sense, because disruptive innovation is the theme, for example, in the area of education or wearables. We were discussing disruptive innovation in these 2 fields, but this is really not innovation. It could be revolution. It's a revolution. The industrial revolution that took place, starting with the development of this engine or steam engine or the steam locomotive, started that. Compared to that, the internet information technology can create, or perhaps may not create as big a difference as in the age of the Industrial Revolution. That's what I thought up to now. But if all devices are connected and many things are stored on the cloud and the world becomes truly borderless, then lifestyles will change and life sciences will change, education will change, and the definition of all things will be transformed. Bitcoin has changed the definition of currency. Of course, there are some states which are trying to prevent this from happening, but they will not succeed because what's the value of currency? When you think about the value of currency, it has to be storable, and it must be complemented or supplemented with trust, and also there's nothing in the definition that says that it must be printed by nations or governments. So the innovation in information technology is not an innovation in my mind. It's a revolution. In March, Rakuten purchased Viber, which is a messaging application company. Well, 10 yen per minute for the feature phone, and free of charge if you make the phone call to a fixed line. And we have about 300 million users now around the world. And of course, in Japan, we have Line. So it's not taken up as fast, but in the United States or Africa and South America, it's growing very much, Viber. And then 1 week later, WhatsApp was purchased for 1,900,000,000,000 yen. So 90 billion for 300 million. And now the WhatsApp is 400 million people for 1.9 trillion yen. And Mark Zuckerberg, what would he say about this? Well, what I thought was communication is shifting toward messaging. And 400 million will most likely increase to 1 billion. And so the business model can come later. And that approach is totally acceptable in the United States. It's a wonderful country. But that's the way it worked in the United States. In Japan, we have 3 carriers who are making 2 trillion yen. But globally, they're making tens of trillions of yen. And WhatsApp, Line, and Viber, these are the 3 biggies in this segment. And if they were to segment the market globally, if they have 20 trillion yen globally, then divided by 3, it'll be 7 trillion per company. So they can make money one way or another.
So there is a dynamic revolution, and we're right in the middle of it. Education, life science, everything is involved. Now, Larry said something. I wanted to actually ask a question, and I don't know if I should talk about this right now, but Larry bought a hardware company, and I asked the founder what was the reason for the failure. And he said, well, we thought too much. In other words, is this the right valuation for this particular company? And what are the specific risks for this acquisition? What are the negative factors? There are so many negative factors that accumulated on the list. And then the world's largest, excuse me, I shouldn't say this because this is going to be covered by Ustream. But anyway, I asked about the strategy. And they said we will basically do everything because we don't know which one is going to be successful. So we'll try to do everything and anything. So if the valuation is appropriate, they will just go ahead with that acquisition and go forward. And you don't have to be 100% successful. That's the shortfall of Japanese people. They feel like they have to be 100% successful. 70% is fine. And even 30% of hit rate is acceptable in the United States. So we have to change the sense of how high the success rate needs to be. In Japan, people are worried about details and worried about all these risks. We have to basically gather more people like entrepreneurs and business people who are willing to take the risks and step forward. I think we are now in a global situation. Education, politics, currency, everything will change. So everything will be redefined. So Edward Coase, Nobel laureate, economist, he talked about vertical integration. And the information transaction cost will determine whether or not the company would do a vertical integration or try to deal with the market. Now, according to the new digital world, everything will have to be redefined, not just the enterprise, but the whole society will have to be redefined. So 90 billion yen for 300 million people and 1.9 trillion yen for 400 million people. Why do you not go to Zuckerberg and ask to buy some of these users? Well, I believe that I'm confident that we can, well, not really confident, but I want to believe that we can create value that is bigger than 1.5 trillion. This is yet to come, 5 trillion yen. So our user base is increasing by 1 million per day. So in the future, we will have maybe 1 billion or 20 billion users. And if everybody pays $1 per year, then that is a revenue of 100 billion and 70% operating profit. So 70 billion yen profit. So that means 1.5 trillion yen is still acceptable. That's how I studied Rakuten. It's a very rough calculation. I didn't think about the details too much. This is very fundamental, actually. Taking risks. If there is a major change, major transformation expected, and if the rough calculation is correct, then people should go ahead with a plan, and they should be appreciated and rewarded for that. But from the investor's perspective, let's say you have now Rakuten, it's a huge enterprise. And then the investors would want you to be successful at 70% of the time. and you have to be bigger in order to take more risks. Now, there is a lot of cash available. With an entrepreneur, maybe 1 or 2 out of 10 will be successful. And all the risks are taken care of by the venture because they have a whole portfolio and they have maybe 1 or 2 successful companies. And you have to basically be successful with just those. Now, for an established company, if they want to take risks, that would involve different types of responsibilities. For example, you talked about Zuckerberg example. Even if you have market cap of yen 1 trillion, I think nowadays you have to take risks in order to survive. But you also asked to produce higher success rate. I think there's a difference in terms of equity market. For example, Yahoo is now recovering in the United States, but it was struggling in the beginning or in the middle because of the activists. And the management were not really free to do what they wanted. So it's the question of do you look at the asset or the future? And it was a very difficult situation. Google and Facebook have something in common. They only issue stocks without voting rights. I'm not really maybe in detail right, but that's roughly speaking correct. So Mark and Cheryl are being invested. So management is being invested into, and if the shareholder doesn't like it, then they can sell a share. It's a very clean model. Now, if you look at the Japanese stock market, companies don't really issue shares without voting rights. Nowadays, the time is very disruptive, and I understand the reasoning for the Japanese investors too, or companies too, but I think companies like Alibaba will be listed in the United States with shares without voting rights. And the reason Rakuten is so strong is because I own a huge amount of the company's shares, so I can make bold decisions. But if you're a hired CEO, then you will not be able to unless you're Hirai-san. Courageous person like Hirai-san. So in the case of the United States, even if you're a hired CEO, you are given full authority, unlike in Japan. So I think there's a difference in terms of background of the stock market. So when everything is being redefined, the way risk money is being invested into in the venture as well as in the IPO market, maybe we need a new approach, different approach, otherwise we'll not be successful. Well, not taking risk is the biggest risk. And that is the path, sure path to deterioration. So Japan, China, you're looking at many different types of markets. Do you think the behavior of the risk takers are changing or not? The risk takers have not really changed over time. We basically look at product, market, good team, and as I listen to Mikitani-san, I feel that when venture capitalists invest to entrepreneur, vision and speed are the most important factors that we look for. And Mikitani-san is talking about this rough sense, but from our perspective, it looks like you have a very clear vision, because vision is basically vision. You want to achieve B. It doesn't matter how you get from A to B. You just want to achieve B. That's the vision. So that is why people like Mr. Mikitani have this really rough model of just achieving B, regardless of the path they take. Another important factor is speed. Large enterprises. Well, today we heard from many excellent pioneering companies, and most of these businesses can be done by existing large enterprises if they wanted to. But entrepreneurs have something that large enterprises do not have, which is speed. So I think it's okay to have a rough plan in the beginning, but you cannot stay with a rough plan forever. You can start very rough, but as you go forward, you have to formulate really detailed action plan and contingency plans. Well, Rakuten employees are here as well, so he doesn't want to give the Rakuten employees the wrong impression that details are not important. Details are detailed. Details are important still. What I want to say is that Japanese people tend to hesitate and just stop before things even start. And sometimes you know that you have to take this step forward, but you cannot. You don't have the courage to. So you have money, and the regulations are changing slowly but surely. And there are people who, with enthusiasm, there is a stimulation, and there is also infrastructure to support entrepreneurship in Japan now. Now, stock market may be different, and there are less investors in Japan, less angels, that's what they say. But maybe that means that we don't have many experienced venture capitalists who understand the vision. I think we have enough money to be invested into entrepreneurship. So what else? What other factors do we need? What is lacking? I think we have to change the mindset of the entrepreneurs in Japan dramatically. In terms of absolute value or amount, if you compare the number of entrepreneurs from China or other countries, Japan is definitely lagging behind. So let's look at really young, smart people in Japan. And only 1% of those will start up their companies in Japan. So we're definitely losing against other countries like China. So we're talking about globalization today and diverse backgrounds, hiring people from diverse backgrounds and different countries. Well, this is the game of numbers in the end. So it's a good idea to form a network when you're still young, and the network should span the world, and you should start working together with those people in other countries, and then we will end up with good startups in Japan as well. From the supplier's perspective, there are some really good companies in Japan, but very few. I think it's good times because in terms of internet and mobile, there are about 6 companies in Japan that can compete globally. So I think we live in a very fortunate time. So the entrepreneurs should ride this wave, form global teams, and be successful. If you try to find good personnel, in Japan maybe the supply is too short. So you're talking about open sourcing the human resources and building a network for that.
We
have to create a network for this, and there are many entrepreneurs. I think the government is trying to invite various entrepreneurs from overseas because they want to create a network like this. And what I've been thinking all along is that, of course, Japan has only half of the population of the United States. The U.S. has 2.5 times the GDP of Japan. And the R&D of companies is actually 1 to 2, but the nation's R&D is 1 to 5, and the internet was born from DARPA. That is the defense-related basic research. It was done by the government, and also for life sciences, MIT. The results were used of these R&D are used by the private sector, but in the United States it's very open. So people with the technology who work hard will come to Japan and start up a business, and nobody stops them. Of course, the IP, they have to protect the IP, but I think we've never lived in an age when open source was much easier than today. So how to be able to include in the network people with different ideas or with different types of technology or money other than the Japanese, I think is very, very important. Now, we want to take time for questions from the audience. Time is limited, so please raise your hand. And if we could receive maybe 2 or 3 questions all in a bunch, and then we can ask the panelists to respond to these questions. So, any questions? Anyone with questions? Ishida-san? I think you said that there are many good questions in the session that he attended. Way in the back, I think I see a hand. Thank you very much for this wonderful session. We sell furniture around on Rakuten, and recently we've started to sell some apparel as well. But manufacturing monozukuri in Japan from the perspective of the manufacturing industry in Japan, in order to survive the revolution coming forward, I think it's necessary to be able to appeal the magnificence of contents that we have in Japan. Do you think that is the most important thing, that is to focus on your strength? Or should we first start by deploying in the world and then cut costs and try to provide contents which is perhaps cheaper, less expensive, but is accessible by many people? So should we focus on high-tech, really sophisticated, high expensive products, or on low costs but accessible products when we want to go abroad? So that's a very fundamental question. Now, any other questions? Somebody in the floor? Could you keep your hand up? Yes, so we can recognize you. Thank you so very much for your presentations. I think people in the audience, many of you are entrepreneurs yourselves, but in Japan, I think there are people who want to start up new companies in the companies that they now work for, and that's the spirit amongst young people. So for these people who have the aspiration but don't have the skills, if you could give us some hints about how to nurture even better entrepreneurs. Thank you. So we received two questions. One was going back to Mikitani-san's presentation. It's an age of redefining new things and creating new business models. So if you insist on quality and try to build things that you can get added value from, or should we go after volume? Because in many instances, many of the business models go after low cost, high volume. So which approach should you go for? I think you'll probably say both, but I'm sure that you have your own ideas about this. So if I could receive your input. I think perhaps Mitachi-san would be the most appropriate person to answer this question. No, I'm just a moderator today. So that's the first question. The second question was about, and this is a question I want all of you to answer. For those young people who want to start something new, if you could give them a piece of advice or some interesting tip that would perhaps be of reference for them or will help them out. Anyone wish to start? Perhaps if you want to take a try at the first question? Yes. Well, this may not be a direct answer to your question, but Japanese people, I think, will most likely go after accumulating value add, and that would increase the costs and raise the price as a result, and may not be relevant for the global market. But in Japan, we have a totally different business model. It's called QV cut. QV cut. I go there too. The president is named Mr. Kitano, and when I met President Kitano, he said that QB cut, the value of QB cut, starts from subtractions. If you go to a normal haircutting place, they'll shampoo you, and they will also give you a shave, and will give you a massage. But at QB cut, the cost is 1,000 yen for 10 minutes. And this was born in Japan. Now they go to Changi Airport in Asia. So made actually expanded to various Asian locations. So to accumulate value add, of course, that's one approach. But I think there's a totally different approach to that traditional approach in Japan. Mikitani-san, the Tokyo Philharmonic Orchestra, I'm a director of that Tokyo Philharmonic Orchestra, and from March 11th, they'll be going on a global tour. They went to the Lincoln Center in New York, Madrid, Paris, London, and then Singapore, Bangkok. They made a world tour for the first time in 40 years. And, people are all scared. They thought, what if the reception is not good? In Japan, we have Japan Cool, manga, or costume play, etc. These young pop culture, I think, is a focus of Japan Cool. Those are the cultures that they're trying to promote. But the Tokyo Philharmonic Orchestra, they got a grand reception, many bravos, and classic music critics in Europe all hailed the performance, and they said that they were even better than their local best orchestras. So I told the people, the orchestra members, that this is the true Japan cool. So respect for Japanese products, for Japanese culture is very, very strong, globally speaking. That was my impression. So, of course, going after volume is fine. But at the same time, I think to develop or create things which are quite traditional with high value and to market them abroad through e-commerce is, I think, another approach that has very high potential. Mr. Mikitani has answered the question, I think, but having listened to your speech, I think that be it QB House or others, the orchestra, I think there are many people who want to compete globally. But would QB House aim to become the largest cut house in the world? No, and also not for the orchestra. With the digital revolution, as Mr. Mikitani said, Japan, U.S., and China are entering the bubble at the same time. But at the same time, I think it's an age when people are able to compare simultaneously with prices or the services of others. So we have to compete global. But they're not trying to become the largest global player first. So I think there's still room to compete using different business models. I don't know, this may be a fake answer, but I think the answer should be both. Going after quality and added value, that is of course the specialty of Japan, but at the same time, because goods can be mass produced, of course, you may have to sacrifice. Many Japanese feel that you'll have to sacrifice some element if you go after mass production. But you can still go after both approaches. As Mikitani-san said, to create something really good and sophisticated, Amazon, and sell them globally, and Amazon, Rakuten, and Alibaba. And I think that you should probably go after both volume and high quality. I think that's better. Now, when we were born, there was only 4 billion people in the world. Now we have 7 billion people in the world, and Brazil, China. In these two countries, many farmers are relocating into the cities. Maybe 500 million people relocating to cities every year. So, manufacturing high-quality products is very good. And of course, on the one hand, you have brands who limit their production level to maintain the quality. But you talked about 300 million people, of BAIBA, but I think that for Japan to succeed in the world, we still have to go after volume. Be it the Sony transistor, it was a wonderful product, but why did it succeed? Because they were able to sell and succeed in the largest market in the world. So they succeeded on volume.
Well, when I talk about volume and quantity, they criticize me for going after quantity all the time because I'm Chinese. But I don't mean to evade the question, but in order for Japan to be successful, we have to go after both quality and quantity. Well, quantity has come up as a question all the time, but I think the quantity business will finish in the 21st century. According to the UN statistics, the population will start to flatten at about 10 billion, and the GDP will exceed $5,000 per person, and the birth rate will be 2.1 or less. So the market will change, and we believe that volume and quantity are both important. Now, moving on to the second question. Please respond to the question instead of the closing remark. So those young people who want to be global entrepreneurs, what would be your suggestion or tips for them? There are many different types of entrepreneurships, and How to Make a Movement is a very important, very famous movie on TED. First person takes the shirt off and starts dancing in a stadium, and then somebody else will copy it, and everybody in the stadium starts to dance in the end. So what's important is that the first person who's dancing naked or the first follower of the dancer. So the first follower may turn a stupid person who was dancing naked into a leader. So do you want to be the naked dancer or the follower that will support the first dancer instead of laughing at him? So that will make a huge difference in terms of entrepreneurship. So we want to discover people like that. Okay? Globalization may be a threat, but for Japan, I believe it's a huge opportunity as well. And in Japan, people use their own chopsticks. If it's knife, spoon, fork, it's all shared. It doesn't matter, it's not really your own. In Korea, you have utensils that are shared. But in Japan, you have your own rice bowl, your own chopsticks. So the behavioral pattern and sense of value is different in Japan. And really, if you could leverage that, that would be a huge advantage for you in the competition of entrepreneurship globally. So entrepreneurs who are here with us today and people in the audience, what is the difference between the two? I think the difference is not so huge. If there was a huge difference, the difference was those people who are entrepreneurs actually started something. So I suggest that you would try to start something. And as Larry said, spend every day trying to discover something new all the time. Now, up on this stage, I have to say I'm surprised. So we heard from so many speakers, and Mikitani-san is actually the most likely person who will act differently based on what we heard today. I mean, he's got enough assets. He doesn't have to work anymore. He doesn't have to do anything anymore. But he's thinking, oh, this is really cool. It's not innovation, it's revolution. That's what he said after this whole day of presentations. So you are listening to the same exact presentations, but you take home different things. That will make a huge difference. And maybe the executives of Rakuten, starting from tomorrow, will start talking about revolution. Maybe you'll see a new sticker in Rakuten office talking about revolution. I don't know. But whatever you felt today, whatever you have discovered today, if you respond to those to that stimulation straightforwardly, maybe you can start something new. I think my takeaway today is a rough cut revolution. I just want to say one thing. Just the other day, I was struggling with something. It was a huge headache for me, a lot of stress at work. And I told my mother that things are really difficult for me right now. And she said, well, you're lucky. I envy you. Because you can change your jobs and you can still feed yourself. You can still bring food home. She grew up in Osaka immediately after the war, and she struggled a lot. So I realized that my troubles are actually really small, insignificant. I mean, everybody in this room, even if they had to leave their job right now, they would find a new job immediately and they will not starve to death. They will never starve to death. So we should feel lucky that we live in this day and age and really take this opportunity, leverage it, and open up to new things and innovations without fearing them, and take that step forward. I think that's the most important attitude. I look at so many startups represented here today, and they're all led by people who started acting immediately. For example, starting from tomorrow. So I think that's the most important attitude for us to have. I used to work in a bank, and I was doing something that I was not very good at. But having that experience actually was very useful for me when I started my own business. Entrepreneurship within the company, that was the question, I think. And business has to consist of innovation and operation, as I always say. And today, we're only talking about innovation. But in order to realize the innovation, we have to have operational scheme in place. So innovation and operation, both sides need to be considered at the same time. Now, if you're working for a company or working for an NPO, how would you exert your entrepreneurship? How can you nurture that? Well, first of all, go out of the box. Don't get stuck in a box and try to come up with new ideas and make that a habit. Don't just extend the present. Continue to think out of the box. The second important thing is accountability. Whether you fail or succeed, it's all your own responsibility. And of course, the company has to have the culture to accept that. And the people who try with entrepreneurship will have their own accountabilities. I was working in the administration of the bank. We introduced a new computer system to save money, reduce cost. And whatever you're doing, there's always room for creativity and innovation. The question is, can you enjoy that project that's right in front of you? That's extremely important. And why am I still working? Because it's fun. It's enjoyable. There is nothing else more fun than what I do day to day. People say, oh, it must be really hard. I don't find it hard at all. And I was already enjoying myself when I was working for a bank as an employee. So don't feel, oh, this is not my company, the profit is not coming to my pocket. Just enjoy what you do. I think that's also very important. And the third thing, do not fear failure. And if you feel that the failure is coming, then make the correction. And then if it fails, leave it, abandon it, and move on to the next thing. The organization has to be able to accommodate that. And the person who is responsible for the failure has to admit that it failed. And I can see that there are people in my company continuing and they keep working at this failure, and they just continue to drag it, but that's not good. If it's a failure, cut it, abandon it. Well, somebody said Ichiro is a genius, not because he's good at batting, but he can continue to enjoy the practice for batting. So I just remember that when I listened to you. Thank you very much again, and I'm sure that there was a lot of stimulation that you can take home. And my discovery was that actually people up on the stage were also very stimulated. So airline, energy, entertainment, different types of innovation and disruptive technology will be introduced tomorrow. And also we'll hear about Japanese people in Silicon Valley and further acceleration. So I hope that tomorrow will be packed with more stimulation. Please give the panelists a round of applause to close the session. And thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.